my name is Henry, and this is my cyberspace. Today's lineup, we will study the Wikipedia article titled Lists of Unusual Deaths, which is a very infamous article in the Wikipedia community. As its title suggests, it hosts a list of cases where people died in unusual circumstances throughout history. If you watch to the end, I would like to personally thank you, since every time I try to start a recording,
I know you don't finish
I get
this video as a
distracted by a new
miracle.
message
It took so
on
long.
Discord or
I've wasted the
something.
entire year
It took so long.
Did you know
the amount I've taken. It doesn't
You're
get
just here to
enough.
be
I will
entertained.
have to kidnap my 6 friends and make them watch this video 166,666 times. Zeuxis died of laughter during a painting of an elderly woman.
I hate to admit it, but some people are just ugly.
Anaxarchus died in 320 BC because the Greek philosopher gained the enmity of the tyrannical ruler of Cyprus, and his name was Nicocreon, for an inappropriate joke he made about tyrants at a banquet in 331 BC. When Anaxarchus visited Cyprus 11 years later, Nicocreon ordered him to be pounded to death in a mortar. During the torture, Anaxarchus said to Nicocreon, "Just pound the bag of Anaxarchus, you do not pound Anaxarchus." I wish I knew what that means. This is like trying to interpret Albert Einstein's last words.
Look identical to Albert Einstein. My girl looks just like Albert Einstein.
I mean, what does this mean, actually? Nicocreon then threatened to cut his tongue out. And instead of this, Anaxarchus bit his tongue off and spat it at Nicocreon's face. There's also seemingly a lot of idiots who had sicknesses and tried curing them in the most dumbass ways on this list, like this guy Qin Shi Huang, who was the first emperor of China. He died because he tried to become immortal by ingesting apparently a crap load of mercury. Or this guy, Heraclitus, I'm not even going to tell you what he did. You can go look yourself, it's horrifying. There's also a surplus of people on here who died to pears, like this kid, Tiberius Claudius Drusus, killed when he was a kid because he was playing with a pear and he tossed the pear up into his mouth, and then he choked on it. This guy, named Antiphanes, who died in 334 BC because a pear just hit his face. 762 AD is when we start seeing deaths because people got drunk. Our first death from a drunkard is this guy, Li Bai, and he was a Chinese poet. He got a little too poetic. He drowned in the Yangtze River after trying to hug the reflection of the moon. Basil I, who was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, died after being dragged 16 miles or 26 kilometers through a forest because his belt got caught in the antlers of a deer during one of his notorious hunting trips. Think about that, 16 miles. Truly think about it. Most deer don't even travel that distance in their whole lifetime. And this guy was being dragged through a forest, so he wasn't only being screwed up by the antlers of the deer, but also like the trees and everything in the forest, so no wonder he died. He probably died after like 3 miles of this torture. Next unusual death is Edmund Ironside. He took over as the King of England in 1016 after his father, Aethelred the Unready, passed away. Edmund Ironside died after he got on the toilet. An assassin hiding underneath with a knife stabbed him. Edmund Ironside. More like Edmund Iron Inside. There's also a few more deaths on here involving kings, like this Hungarian chap who died after he sat on his throne. Fat guy. And this one's pretty interesting. The Erfurt latrine disaster. You may have heard of this one being on this side of YouTube. So on July 26, 1184, during an assembly of big politicians in the Holy Roman Empire. So we have another death here involving a king, and his name was Henry VI. He was holding this assembly at the Petersburg Citadel in Erfurt, Germany. In the Petersburg Citadel at this time is a little design flaw. These attendees were on the second floor of the building, and below the second floor is a cesspit of a bunch of human waste. So this immense amount of attendees and their immense weight causes the second floor of the building to collapse and fall into this human waste cesspit. In this commotion, 60 people died. Some of them died because they hit the ground too hard or whatever, but it's theorized that some of them died because they just drowned in all this human waste. So yeah, this is our first mass casualty event we've gone over. But Henry VI actually survived, by the way. Our next unusual death is Martin of Aragon. This guy died in 1410 because he ate an entire goose. But that's not all. After he ate this entire goose, his favorite jester Bora entered his room. When Martin asked Bora where he had been, the jester replied with, "Out of the next vineyard, where I saw a young deer hanging by his tail from a tree, as if someone had so punished him for stealing figs." This joke caused Martin to laugh uncontrollably, and because he was suffering from indigestion because he ate an entire goose, he laughed until he collapsed and died. We now move on to the Renaissance, and here we have an event that stands out in human history called the 1518 Dancing Plague. I'm sure you've all heard the story. It also happened in the Holy Roman Empire. What happened was this large group of people, anywhere from 50 to 400 people, seemingly out of nowhere, were influenced by mass hysteria to begin dancing uncontrollably until they died. Several of them died from heart attacks, strokes, or exhaustion, or whatever. Some sources say that up to 15 people died per day because of this at one point. This event has become a very well-known event in the history of the Renaissance. It's been referenced frequently nowadays because of its strangeness or unusualness. This has led to some modern-day theories on how this dancing plague started. One theory suggests that it was indeed mass hysteria and people just stupidly fell for it. One other theory suggests that these people were food poisoned by fungi. I think these people were just autistic, honestly, and they weren't diagnosed yet because it was 1518. Looky there, we have another death involving a king named Henry. So this guy, Henry II, he was the king of France from 1547 to 1559, and he died unusually. Here's the story. So, on June 30th, 1559, Henry II invited his old enemies that he made peace with recently to watch a jousting match. It was also a celebration of his daughter's marriage. Anyway, you know how jousting is the most barbaric sport in history and never should have been invented? Yeah, this is an example of that. During the jousting match, one of the lances, which are the sticks that you hit the other guy with in the jousting match, broke apart and fragmented into many pieces. Reportedly, one of these pieces hit Henry's eye and killed him. No, I'm just playing. He wasn't killed instantly. Here's another example of this horrific old medicinal techniques that led to these deaths, despite literally the best and most advanced doctors at the time advising that his eye be treated. Henry's official court doctors advocated for a wait-and-see strategy. Okay, so because this wait-and-see strategy obviously didn't work, this eye injury led him to receiving brain damage, which led to sepsis, which led to his death 10 days later. Awful. Fortunately, after it became public news that Henry II died because of an accident during a jousting tournament, jousting did start to wane in popularity as a sport. After that one, we have 2 deaths in a row from people falling over stairs. It's kind of funny. It includes this guy who tripped over his 4.5-foot beard and fell to his death on the stairs. This guy, Tycho Brahe, died because he was at a banquet and refused to relieve himself because it would be a breach of etiquette. When he got home, he literally could not pee anymore, but only in small bouts and with excruciating pain. One night, 11 days later, he became delirious and died. Ugh. There are also modern theories on how this guy died. Like, some people say he had an inflamed prostate. Some people also say that urine literally burst and infected his blood because he refused to relieve himself. This Swiss political leader was assassinated because some guy in a bear costume axed him. It's kind of goofy. This English army officer named Arthur Aston was killed in Ireland by the opposing army because they reportedly ripped his wooden prosthetic leg off and then started bashing his brains out with it. That's what the article says. Holy barbarism. This French dude named Molière died in 1673. He was playing the part of a hypochondriac, which is someone who obsessively believes they have an illness, on a play. But get this, Molière, the actor, was actually ill on stage. In fact, he had just suffered a pulmonary hemorrhage from tuberculosis. He knew he was sick, but he disguised his symptoms by pretending this was part of the show. In the act, the character he was playing ends up dead in a chair to finish the story. This guy, suffering from a pulmonary hemorrhage, sits in a chair to rest because he is so ill. After the play is finished, he was carried from the stage to his house where he died. So I guess this guy was just really invested in his part. Our next entry on here is another mass casualty event. This happened in 1814. It's called the London Beer Flood, and you may have heard of this one before. So inside a brewery, a 22-foot tall wooden vat of beer burst, which tumbled onto the other vats of beer that also burst, so it really was a chain reaction of these vats bursting. The resulting flood from this killed 8 people in the slum area near the brewery. It also indirectly caused more deaths because these morons who were living in the slum or nearby started collecting this beer that was on the ground because, it was infinite beer infected with all the other crap on the ground. You know how drunk these guys were in London back then, though. They would do crazy like this. A 13-year-old kid named William Snyder passed away after a circus clown named Manuel Reyes picked him up and swung him around by his heels. This unknown woman from England had a more tragic, sad death. It happened after 12 years of this woman consuming her own hair. This particular death stuck out to me because this is the first death on here in which the victim's name has been permanently forgotten. So I did a little more digging on what could have caused this, and I found out that this woman died from what is known as Rapunzel syndrome, where humans can get a condition in their intestines from consuming their own hair. There was a more recent case of Rapunzel syndrome that was widely publicized when a 16-year-old kid named Jasmine Beaver, who also lived in the UK, died from chewing on her own hair for years. It's just a sad, terrifying way to go when you have an addiction like this, Don't worry, the next death we have is the complete opposite. This guy named Clement Vallandigham had a very inspiring masculine death. He died like a man. He did work for the Confederacy during the Civil War, but that's besides the point. The point is, this guy was an American politician and a lawyer, and in 1871, Clement was defending this man named Thomas McGeehan. Mr. McGeehan had shot a man named Tom Myers and killed him in a bar fight. So how is Clement going to prove that Mr. McGeehan was innocent? Well, this lawyer tried to prove that during the bar fight, it was not McGeehan who shot this guy, but instead it was the guy, Tom Myers, shooting himself when he was drawing his pistol. When Mr. McGeehan and Mr. Clement went to court, Clement was reenacting this bar fight with the defense attorneys with a gun he believed to be unloaded. It actually was loaded. So during this reenactment of Tom Myers, Clement shot himself in the abdomen, just like he said Tom Myers did to himself during the bar fight. Clement died the next day from organ inflammation, but Mr. McGeehan, now that Clement essentially proved he did not shoot his gun and Tom Myers did in fact shoot himself, was acquitted and released from custody. He then died in another gunfight in a bar 4 years later, so kind of useless. In 1875, a scary mouse invaded a factory in Manchester and started terrifying all the workers. But to every villain in a story, there is a hero, and we don't know the name of this hero. So this unknown man, with the scary mouse having invaded his factory, attempted to shoo the mouse away, to which the mouse jumped on the man and hid inside his clothes. This caused the man to gasp and open his mouth wide in surprise. The mouse then jumped in the man's mouth and he swallowed it. The mouse, which was still living, then started tearing and biting this guy's throat and chest. He later died in horrible agony, so it gives you an idea. Okay, so we have another mass casualty event similar to the London beer flood here. Remember when all the British people died because they drank beer off the ground?
Oh look! An apple!
Well, in 1875, a large fire broke out at a storehouse in Dublin. This fire caused 263,000 gallons, or 1,193,000 liters of whiskey to release into the streets of Dublin. No one actually died from this large fire, but the real deaths happened when this crowd gathered around the building and started drinking the whiskey flowing out of the building. Yeah, 13 people died from alcohol poisoning. We now have our first double death on here. This British servant named Haig. We don't seem to know what the rest of his name is, apparently. Haig was instructed to fetch a 4-chambered pistol for his master and bring it to him. When he got the pistol, he shot himself in the jaw and died instantly. Our second death in this sequence is another servant who worked for the same person that discovered Mr. Haig. She was demonstrating how she thought Mr. Haig died. She shot herself too and died. Next, we have Sir William Payne Galway. He suffered massive internal injuries after falling on, what else? A turnip. If you somehow don't know, that is a vegetable. And it looks like this.
What?
We have our first death from a meteor event on August 22nd, 1888, when a meteor shower hit the village of Suleymaniye in Iraq, which was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. 2 meteorites hit 2 men, one got paralyzed and one was killed. Even though we don't know the name of this guy who died, he is the only credible case of death by meteorite in human history. Alright, before we get into this next one, have you heard of the movie Cocaine Bear? That movie that's based on a true story where this bear gets high on cocaine and starts acting crazy and killing people and, disemboweling them. Well, this next unusual death is similar, except this particular bear reportedly walked into a bar and picked up a keg of vodka because, this is in Russia. Go figure. And this barkeep named Isaac Rabinovich was hugged to death by the bear when he tried to steal the vodka back. And his 3 children also tried to take it back, but they were hugged to death too, according to this part. So at this point, it seems like this guy's entire family's been mauled to death by the bear. So the villagers apparently teamed up and shot this bear to death. Now that's the real Cocaine Bear. That's Cocaine Bear 2. Soon after this, in 1896, we have our first death from an automobile accident, and her name was Bridget Driscoll. She died in England from a car that was reportedly driving only 4 miles per hour and could only travel up to 8 miles per hour anyway. Witnesses described this car as going at a reckless pace like a fire engine before it struck Miss Driscoll. Imagine today, those people would see trash cans going on the highway at 70 miles per hour. Empress Elizabeth of Austria was part of the monarchy of Austria-Hungary from 1854 to 1898, the country in which Archduke Franz Ferdinand got shot and World War I basically started. This is another assassination incident in Austria-Hungary. It also involves an assassin named Luigi. Sound familiar? So this guy named Luigi Lucchini was an anarchist from Italy who basically wanted to be an example for others and incite revolution by assassinating any sovereign he could get close to. So when he got the chance to assassinate the Queen of Hungary, he walked up to her and stabbed her. She didn't die instantly, but considering this death is on the list, I think the unusual part is that after she got stabbed, she continued walking with her personal assistant, not actually realizing she got because apparently her corset was too tight. She walked for 100 more yards and then boarded a boat that was traveling along a nearby river. It was only then when she was really far down this river on the boat that one of her personal assistants realized she was seriously injured. After an hour of the attack, she was pronounced dead in a hotel. Reportedly, the sting punctured one of her lungs, but her complete autopsy was destroyed for some reason. Luigi Lucchini was apprehended soon after he left the scene and was thrown in jail for the rest of his life and died 12 years later in 1910. We're now moving on to the 20th century and we're starting out with a banger. We have another mass casualty event here where 6,000 people got poisoned and 70 people died from beer poisoning. This beer had arsenic laced in it, which is an extremely bad element to get in contact with. It caused most of the survivors of this accident to become paralyzed or die. And look, we have another mass casualty event that happened in the same year of 1900. What happened here was, on Thanksgiving Day, a large crowd of people gathered on top of the roof of a factory to get the best possible view of a nearby football game between Californian football teams because this crowd collectively refused to pay the $1 admission fee to get into the stadium and actually watch the game normally. By the way, $1 back in 1900 is $38 a day in 2025. Of course, with this large group of people, the roof collapsed and all these people fell in. About 100 of these guys fell on the 500-degree hot glass furnace inside the building, and a lot of them were severely burned. Some of them just fell to their deaths and died on impact. In all, 23 people were killed and 100 people were seriously wounded by the furnace. It's called the Thanksgiving Day disaster, and it's the deadliest accident at a sporting event in American history. Truly one of the most American moments in history. This is what happens when you combine an American holiday with an American sport with American infrastructure. Soon after this, we have 2 deaths in a row involving baseballs. One of these guys named R. Stanton Walker was passing a knife to his friend during a baseball game when a foul ball was hit straight in his direction and shoved the knife he was passing straight into his chest. He died within minutes while still sitting in the chair, telling everyone around him he was fine and it didn't hurt that much, even though he was bleeding. Guys, if you're in a situation where you're hurting or struggling, never tell your friend or your family that it doesn't hurt that much. That's what friends are for. If you do that to your friend, it hurts both of you. Our next baseball death in a row was Ed Delahanty, and he was a pretty famous baseball player, actually probably one of the most famous of all time. So Ed Delahanty is in a very unusual death-ready spot. He was drunk, and he was on a train, and he was acting super crazy, and he was threatening the people on the train with a razor. The last person who saw him alive was a man named Sam Kingston, so he's the only person who can be trusted in giving the details of his death. But it says his account is spotty and inconsistent. Listen, Sam was probably pounded as much as Mr. Delahanty, so these two drunk guys on a train got into a fight, and while the train was traveling on a bridge over the Niagara Falls, this fight ended up in Ed Delahanty falling out of the train to his death into the Niagara Falls. No one really knows if this other drunkard pushed Mr. Delahanty out of the train, or if he accidentally fell out of the train, or it was deliberate, which is supported by some people saying that this guy was yelling about death that night. This unknown woman in 1908, we have our first person to die because of an airplane crash. His name was Thomas Selfridge, and he was actually in a plane with Orville Wright, who was one of the inventors of the first powered aircraft, the Wright Flyer, and he was also the pilot of this aircraft that they're flying. Both of these people were presenting a new military aircraft in the United States military, and during their flight, they reportedly ran into problems with the aircraft and they crashed. Selfridge fractured his skull and died 3 hours later, and Orville Wright actually survived the plane crash and lived for another 40 years. Dietrich von Hülsenheisler was a pretty interesting man. Not only was he the chief of the German Imperial Military Cabinet, but apparently he was also a ballerina dancer. One evening, this 56-year-old man, by the way, was giving a ballerina performance to the German Emperor Wilhelm II and his fellow guests. Okay, bear with me on this. This performance included pirouettes, jumps, capers, and flirtatious kisses to the audience. Wikipedia's words, by the way, not mine. After the performance ended, he gave a bow and then collapsed and was pronounced dead at the scene, like on the stage. And this isn't even the gayest part of his death. This is gay, but it gets gayer. This guy's death happened in the midst of a German government scandal in which some people in the cabinet of the German Empire were being accused of homosexual conduct, and there were literal trials over these accusations. This affair has been described as the biggest homosexual scandal ever. Not just in German history, but all history. Dietrich, the guy who died on stage, was the organizer for the cover-up of this scandal to cover up the homosexuality of the German cabinet. This whole thing also resulted in Dietrich's death being covered up for a while. So yeah, gayest death you'll see on this list for sure. Sigmund Neuberger was a German magician. He was a German magician who had recently experienced the death of a beloved pet named Beauty the dog. After the dog's death, Sigmund reached out to the Edinburgh City Council to arrange an official burial of the dog and also have himself buried next to the dog when his own life ended, because he predicted that he would not survive much longer after the dog's death. 4 days later, on May 9th, 1911, whilst he was performing his last ever official magic act at the Edinburgh Theatre, a fire began and engulfed the building. Although the entire audience of 3,000 made it out safely, they initially thought the fire was a part of the magic act, and they did not leave until the theater manager signaled the theater's orchestra to start playing God Save the King.
God save the Queen, my son.
Which in England is sort of a song that signifies danger or the end of an event. Sigmund unfortunately died in the fire along with 10 other stage performers and his body double, who was even misidentified as Sigmund for a short while after the guys found the guy's death or whatever. Overall, his prediction that he would not live very long after the dog's death proved true. 33-year-old tailor and inventor Franz Reichelt leaped from the Eiffel Tower wearing a parachute made from cloth, his own invention, and fell 57 meters or 187 feet to his death. He was asked by friends and authorities to use a dummy for the feat, but declined, with him saying he intended to prove the worth of his invention. Reichelt had become fixated on developing a suit for aviators that would convert into a parachute and allow them to survive a fall should they be forced to leave their aircraft midair. Initial experiments conducted with dummies dropped from the 5th floor of his apartment building had been successful, but he could not copy his success with his later experiments, as we could see by his death. Damn it. Dropped in the gutter. I was gonna throw it off the balcony. Between the 1st and 12th of July 1916, 4 people were killed and 1 was critically injured by a series of shark attacks at Jersey Shore in New Jersey. Before 1916, most of the American public, even scientists, doubted that sharks could fatally wound a living person in the warm waters of the northeastern United States without being provoked beforehand. The first shark attack in this series was a man named Charles Van Sant, who decided while on vacation to take a quick swim in the Atlantic with his doggo. Van Sant began shouting while he was swimming for help, but his family believed that he was shouting for the dog, so they ignored him. He was not shouting for the dog, however. He was shouting because a shark was gnawing off his legs. He was rescued by lifeguards, but bled to death soon afterwards. Even after the attack, the beaches remained open to the public. Just what happened in Jaws, by the way. That's the plot of Jaws. This led to 3 other people being attacked and dying, and a 5th and final victim who was attacked but survived, even though he was a half-mile away from shore. That's a long ways. These attacks led to a wave of panic that led to shark hunts aimed at eradicating the population of man-eating sharks, and entered into American popular culture, serving as an inspiration for the novel Jaws and its film adaptation in the mid-1970s. Our next unusual death is that of the Russian mystic Rasputin. If you don't know who he is, he became infamous for befriending the noble family of Russia, and in the final years of the Russian Empire in the 1910s, he became one of its most influential figures because of his seeming ability to heal his patients through faith. He is now considered to be one of the first faith healers. In 1916, Rasputin and the Russian noble family started to become increasingly unpopular, and on December 30th, Rasputin was assassinated by conservative Russians who did not appreciate his influence over the Russian Empire. The most trustworthy account we get of his death is from the murderer of Rasputin himself, Felix Yusupov. This guy said that they attempted to poison Rasputin by placing cyanide on his food, but he seemingly used his powers to transmute the poison and avoid dying. The assassins then resorted to shooting Rasputin to death. He was shot first in the chest and pretended to collapse and die. He used this distraction to jump up and attack Yusupov. The 2 men fought, but Yusupov eventually got up and ran away, probably to escape his mystic powers or whatever. Rasputin started chasing the assassins down, but eventually was shot again twice, with one of these shots being at point-blank range at his forehead. After he was killed, his body was dumped into a nearby river. So, yeah, no one's surviving that. After this, we have yet another mass casualty event. On January 15th, 1919, a large tank of 12,000 metric tons of molasses burst in Boston, Massachusetts, which flooded the streets at a pace of around 35 miles per hour, which was so fast that it produced a loud rumbling sound akin to a train incoming, and also made the ground shake. It killed 21 people and injured 150, and in the area around the flood, the smell of molasses reportedly lingered on hot summer days for decades. On October 2nd, 1920, a Barbary macaque and a German shepherd owned by Alexander the King of Greece got into a violent skirmish in Alexander's garden. Alexander attempted to break up this fight, but ended up getting bit by the Barbary. He died of sepsis 23 days later. Thomas Lynn Bradford is perhaps the first death on here which involves the paranormal. Or there was another death that involved the paranormal on here and I already forgot. That would be pretty stupid. Mr. Bradford was a spiritualist who was very adamant on the belief that there is an afterlife, and apparently found a way to prove the afterlife one day. His belief led him to seal his apartment in Detroit, blow out the pilot on his heater, and turn on the gas. Flashback to a few weeks earlier when Mr. Bradford got into contact with another spiritualist named Ruth Duran, and the two spiritualists agreed that there was only one way to solve the mystery of whether or not there was an afterlife, with two minds that are properly attuned, and one mind that must shed its earthly mantle, aka die. In the week after his death, Ruth Duran was subject to widespread attention from the press because of her role in Bradford's death, which caused her to try and elicit a response from Bradford's spirit in the apartment. Bradford did not respond to any of these messages, obviously. However, a week after Bradford took his own life, another woman named Lulu Mack claimed that she had received a message from Bradford's spirit in another house. Max said that she could not easily communicate with Bradford's spirit because taking your own life results in a weak spirit after death. Lulu Mack and Ruth Duran decided to team up and attempt to communicate with Bradford's spirit together. The two women and other spiritualists decided to begin a session in Duran's house in which they would try to talk to the spirit of Bradford. During the session, they reported that they felt a ghostly presence and that the lights turned off, and that Ruth felt Bradford's spirit communicating with her. She commanded the other spiritualists in the room to write a message down of what she interpreted Bradford's spirit to be saying to her. She would then go on to claim that Bradford was saying he was speaking to them from beyond, and that he could still see everyone, but everything else was shrouded in darkness, and other shit like that. Let's move on, because these women are full of baloney. Here we have another double death, and this one is of Mr. and Mrs. Earl J. Dunn. While attempting to turn around at Grandview in Yellowstone National Park, the Dunns somehow backed their car over a cliff despite a tree barrier that would normally have made this impossible. The vehicle fell 800 feet and then rolled another 200 feet, and they died. Yeah. The lawyer Thornton Jones slit his own throat while he was having a nightmare. An inquest of the death delivered a verdict of suicide while temporarily insane. The Australian 16-year-old Philip McLean and his brother were beating up a cassowary on the streets. Why? I don't know. The cassowary then fought back by knocking him down and kicking him in the neck, which opened a large cut leading to death from loss of blood. Guys, animal abuse is not cool. Our next notable death on here is that of Harry Houdini. It's unusual because we still don't even know how this guy died. The facts are, he died from peritonitis, which is a swelling of the abdomen, so whatever went wrong with him started in his abdomen. Some sources say he got appendicitis, with one famous story claiming he got it from a college student named J. Gordon Whitehead, who punched Houdini repeatedly in order to see how much Houdini's stomach could endure. Obviously a lot, because the college student punched him so many times that later that evening he was performing a magic show in extreme pain and had insomnia for the next 2 days. This might have been the catalyst for his appendicitis, but we will never truly know. There are tons of other theories on his death, but I'm not going to get into them because most of them involve the perception that he was some supernatural being that could harness magic. Okay, this next one is terrifying, and it's called the Gillingham Fair Fire Disaster. What happened here was, on July 11th, 1929, a crowd gathered in a field in England for a fundraising event. The fundraiser included a demonstration of fire safety in England, where a group of men and boys would gather on a pillar, and the pillar would be intentionally set on fire so that the firemen could rescue the trapped boys from them dying. This already sounds like a terrible idea, but it went terribly wrong when the fire was set earlier than expected, so the fire instantly ignited the whole building and trapped all the boys on top. The firefighters were immediately aware that they were now dealing with a genuine emergency instead of a demonstration, but initially most of the spectators did not realize anything was wrong. They understood the cries for help they heard to be part of the performance and reportedly cheering and applauding what they believed to be realistic and spectacular effects, until they witnessed two boys with their clothes ablaze jump to their deaths from on top of the structure. 13 boys died on the scene, and 2 boys were rescued alive and taken to a hospital, but they both eventually died of their injuries. The hospital they were taken to was also the hospital which they were fundraising for. The 26-year-old convicted murderer and death row inmate at San Quentin in California named William Kogut reportedly committed suicide using a pipe bomb he made with playing cards and a hollow steel leg from his cot. Hey, so I don't mean to jump scare you, but do you remember this photo? This is supposedly a photo of Mr. Eben Byers, an American golfer who repeatedly drank the radioactive medicine drink Radithor, which caused a major health crisis in America back in the day because they didn't know how deadly radiation was. Byers started drinking the popular medicine Radithor in the late 1920s, believing the drink gave him a toned-up feeling. He stopped in October 1930 only after he felt that effect had faded, and his teeth started falling out. At this point, he drank around 1,400 bottles of Radithor, which caused him to absorb an estimated 36 micrograms of radiation. Guys, a lethal dose of this stuff is 2 micrograms. So this guy had consumed, divided by 2, 18 times the lethal dose. The last 2 years of this guy's life were agonizing, obviously, with constant headaches and tremendous loss of weight following. In 1931, a United States government agent asked him to give a testimony about his experience with drinking Radithor, but the guy was too sick to travel, so the agency sent a lawyer to testify at home. The lawyer met Byers and discovered that most of his lower jaw and all of his upper jaw, except for 2 teeth, had been completely removed, and that all the bones in his body were disintegrating rapidly, with holes forming one by one in his skull. Byers died on March 31st, 1932 of jaw cancer. His body was so radioactive that his coffin had to be created using lead as to not let the radiation escape, which is like the same thing they did with the Chernobyl liquidators, now that I think about it. So, one more thing, this image. I've actually discovered that it is most likely not real. I have people on Quora telling me it's not real, and I have a source from Reddit that says the image originates from a 1942 book on plastic surgery and war injuries, with this picture and other very grisly sights in it. This user on Reddit theorizes that someone took this photo and attached it with a story of Eben Byers. Still, Byers probably did look a lot like whoever this guy was, and if what this Reddit user says is true, then it is still a picture taken of a guy whose jaw fell off. Okay, moving on. Irishman Michael Malloy was a former firefighter turned unemployed alcoholic homeless person. 5 of Malloy's former acquaintances, who nicknamed themselves the Murder Trust, planned to kill Malloy for his life insurance. Over the course of 2 months, they added antifreeze, turpentine, horse liniment, and finally rat poison in his alcohol, but Malloy drank it with no problems whatsoever. They then tried feeding him wood alcohol, expired oysters, and then a sandwich made of expired sardines and shrapnel, none of which had the desired effect of killing him. The group then tried to freeze him to death, and when that failed, they ran him over twice with a taxi, from which Malloy recovered. Finally, they connected a hose to a coal gas jet and placed it in his mouth, which caused his death from carbon monoxide poisoning. 80-year-old Australian Susan Grace Kelly was sitting with her daughter when she fell back dead after hearing a loud clap of thunder. Her last words were, "That was very close." Dude, the lightning didn't even hit you. Benjamin Taylor was getting surgery to remove a large cluster of boils that had formed on his skin. When the doctors were attempting to burn the surgical incision shut, their hot tools ignited the gases within Taylor's lungs, causing an explosion that killed Taylor and injured 2 nurses. Nicholas Comper was an English aviator and aircraft designer who also had the underrated virtue of being a practical joker. One night, he was trying to set off fireworks inside of a pub, but was stopped and kicked out from the building. He then started lighting his fireworks outside, and as he was bending down to ignite his first firework, a passerby inquired what he was doing, to which he replied that he was a mercenary planning to blow up the nearby town hall. Not understanding that this was a joke, the passerby knocked Comper down to the curb, which killed him.
That is called a practical joke.
American chemist and engineer Thomas Midgley Jr. contracted polio in 1940 and was left severely disabled. Using that engineer's brain of his, He devised an elaborate system of ropes and pulleys to pull himself out of bed. On November 2nd, 1944, at the age of 55, he was found dead at his home in Ohio. He had been killed by his own device after he became entangled in it and died of strangulation. Mary Reeser is an infamous example of a person dying from spontaneous combustion. Spontaneous combustion is the concept of a person being incinerated for seemingly no apparent reason, which makes it look like the person was literally just set on fire out of nowhere.
Well, what the hell?
Keep in mind that spontaneous combustion falls under the realm of pseudoscience, which are unscientific theories that are presented as real science. Anyway, the reason that Reeser seemed to have died from this unexplained incineration is that on the morning of July 2nd, 1951, Reeser's landlady was attempting to open her locked door, but found it uncomfortably warm to the touch. This caused her to call the police, and when the police arrived, they entered Reeser's house and found the woman's ashes scattered across the chair she was sitting on. All that was left of her was her left foot, her backbone, and her skull, which her skull had been burnt so badly that it shrunk to the size of a teacup. Guys, she got genuinely slimed out. This case became so famous that evidence from the scene was sent to the FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover. Of course, it's obvious that this woman didn't just suddenly get incinerated out of nowhere. There are probably 1,000 different explanations that are better than this that are just overlooked. Have you ever read Goodnight Moon? It's a fire book. Well, did you know that the author of this book was hospitalized for an ovarian cyst? So to prove how healthy she was after her treatment, she kicked her foot in the air, which dislodged a blood clot in her leg, and the blood clot quickly traveled to her brain, and she died in emergency surgery? Well, now you know. Here we have another double death, and this one is of Mr. and Mrs. Earl J. Dunn. During the 1960 Belgian Grand Prix, 2 people were killed and 2 more were seriously injured. One of the deaths was that of Alan Stacy, who lost control of the car after a bird struck him in the face. Wonder if that counts as a bird strike. The second death was unrelated to the first, and it was that of Chris Bristow, who died a few minutes later when he was decapitated after his car flipped over. During the testing of the experimental nuclear reactor SL-1 in Idaho, 2 soldiers and a sailor were killed, but their deaths were not due to acute radiation poisoning, like most of these horrific deaths from nuclear accidents are. While trying to bring the reactor online, one of the soldiers named John Burns was supposed to pull a control rod partway out by hand, but he pulled the rod further out than intended. The reactor instantly went critical, which boiled the water around the reactor within a fraction of a second due to the heat released from the removed rod. The force of the steam expanding lifted the entire freaking reactor building into the air about 2.77 meters or 9 feet and 1 inch. Many components were thrown out the top, one of which impaled Richard Legg, who was the sailor. Legg was lifted off the ground and penetrated the ceiling, leaving him dangling. While the reactor was airborne, the radioactive steam escaped, which sprayed the room. The steam was so hot that Burns instantly died of severe thermal burns. The other soldier, named Leroy McKinley, suffered a head wound, from which he died later that day. All 3 men died instantly, but they were spared from the terrible, awful fate of dying from acute radiation syndrome. The steam left the bodies of all 3 men radioactive, so they had to be buried in lead-lined coffins. Albert Decker was an American actor who was found in his bathtub with a noose around his neck, wearing what else than women's lingerie. It also says there was a scarf over his eyes, handcuffs around his wrists, ropes around his ankles, and leather belts wrapped around his torso, with vulgar phrases and drawings written in lipstick all over his body. Look, I'm not kink shaming, but this is stepping over the line. On June 29, 1971, 3 Soviet cosmonauts became the first people to die in space after their spacecraft Soyuz 11 began depressurizing in space before they re-entered the atmosphere. They're the only reported human deaths outside the Earth's atmosphere. After watching the Kung Fu Capers episode of The Goodies, Alex Mitchell laughed continuously for 25 minutes and then fell dead on his sofa from heart failure due to what doctors discovered years later with the help of his granddaughter was a genetic condition called long QT syndrome, which is a disorder that messes up your heartbeat. This next death in 1978, Georgy Markov, this one is actually explained by Walter White in the show Breaking Bad, so I'm going to hand it over to Walter for a minute.
Ricin. It's an extremely effective poison. It's toxic in small doses, also fairly easy to overlook during an autopsy. Back in the late 70s, ricin was used to assassinate a Bulgarian journalist. The KGB modified the tip of an umbrella to inject a tiny pellet into the man's leg. And we're talking about an amount not much bigger than the head of a pin. But it killed him? Oh, yes.
It's a great show. Couldn't just not put it in the video. Breaking Bad's probably going to get mentioned in every video on my channel from now on. I hope so, at least. Azaria Chamberlain was a 9-week-old Australian baby girl who was killed by a dingo, which is one of these things, on the night of August 17th, 1980, during a family camping trip to Uluru in Australia's Northern Territory. Her body was never found, sadly. Her parents, Lindy and Michael, reported that she had been taken from their tent by a dingo. However, Lindy was tried for murder and spent more than 3 years in prison, and Michael received a suspended sentence. Lindy was released only after Azaria's jacket was found near a dingo's den. In 2012, which was 32 years after Azaria's death, the Chamberlain's version of events was only then supported by a coroner. This is actually a pretty famous case in Australia. 24-year-old tourist David Allen Kirwan jumped into the alkaline and scalding 202 degrees Fahrenheit Celestine Pool at Yellowstone National Park to save his friend's dog. The dog died within moments, and his body dissolved in the hot spring. Kirwan, who was blinded and burned over his entire body, was airlifted to Salt Lake City and died the next day. Man, we must be alert at all times on camping trips. 17-year-old Jason Finley from Piscataway, New Jersey, was electrocuted during a thunderstorm when a lightning strike caused an electrical surge to shoot through the wire of a telephone the boy was holding and entered his left ear, causing his heart to stop beating instantly. Franco Brunn was an inmate at a detention center in Ontario, Canada, who choked to death after attempting to gulp down a pocket-sized Bible. 35-year-old veteran skydiver Ivan McGuire was recording a parachute jump when he jumped from a plane without a parachute. The guy was recording from a camera on his helmet, and this is the actual footage of it that you are watching. Turns out that he had been so focused on capturing the footage that he forgot his parachute equipment back on the plane. In this footage, you can kind of see him realize that as they go up, he might have been trying to deploy his parachute too, but that was the moment when he realized he didn't have it. Nobody tried to warn him because it's assumed that everyone on the plane thought his recording equipment he had was the parachute. A poodle named Catchy in Caballito, Buenos Aires, fell 13 floors and hit 75-year-old Marta Espina, killing both instantly. 46-year-old Edith Sola came to see the incident and was fatally hit by a bus. An unidentified man who witnessed her death had a heart attack and also died on his way to the hospital. That dog had 3 assists. Or wait, no, that'd be 1 kill and 2 assists because he fell on the woman and she died. And then the 2 other people who came to witness it were assists. 31-year-old tourist Daniel O'Brien took his own life by jumping into one of the engines of a British Airways Boeing 747 at an airport in Trinidad. He is said to have scaled an airport wall without any clothes on, with himself slathered in grease, and stolen a vehicle from 4 security guards before hurtling himself into one of the plane's engines. When the plane took off and while it was in the air, he is assumed to have died. 38-year-old Greg Gingrich was vacationing at the Grand Canyon with his teenage daughter. He began to play act losing his balance to frighten her. His daughter, who was unimpressed with his antics, walked away. Gingrich, however, missed his footing and fell approximately 400 feet or 120 meters into the canyon to his death. I'll never be that stupid when I'm a father. On February 19, 1994, Gloria Ramirez, a patient suffering from late-stage cervical cancer, was admitted into a hospital in Riverside, California. She was extremely confused and her heart rate and respiration was all screwed up. The doctors sedated Ramirez and she entered a sleep that she would never wake up from. During this administering of the medication, the doctors noticed a weird oily sheen covering her whole body and began detecting an odd fruity garlic smell. Her blood also smelled like ammonia. Later in the evening, the doctors started getting really sick and fainting. One doctor couldn't move her limbs after he woke up. The suspicion that everyone had in the hospital was that there was a gas leak going on, so the whole emergency room wing was evacuated to outside the hospital, with a skeleton crew remaining in the building to help stabilize Ramirez, until she died of kidney failure due to her cancer. 23 doctors that dealt with Ramirez became ill, with 5 having to be hospitalized. An investigation was opened up into this, and it seems like Ramirez was emitting these life-threatening gases because of the chemicals she was putting on her to try and self-treat her cancer. And these chemicals got turned into deadly toxin when mixed with the medicine the doctors were giving her. 48-year-old chemistry professor Karen Wetterhahn at Dartmouth College died 10 months after a few drops of dimethylmercury, one of the strongest known neurotoxins, landed on her protective gloves. Although she had been following the required procedures, it permeated the gloves and her skin within seconds. Symptoms began showing up 5 months later, like loss of balance, slurred speech, etc. One of her former students said her husband saw tears rolling down her face. I asked if she was in pain. The doctor said it didn't appear that her brain could even register pain. Guys, I wouldn't recommend getting in contact with this stuff. Seems kind of dangerous. English 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell died from a heart attack in his closet, brought on by the buildup of butane and propane in his blood after excessive use of deodorant sprays. The deodorant was accumulating in his closet, and one day when he stepped in it, the chemicals straight up overloaded his system. He was reported to have been obsessed with personal hygiene. 43-year-old engineer Bernd Jurgen Brandes was voluntarily slaughtered and eaten by Armin Meiwes after they met on the internet. One of the first things these guys did after they met each other in real life was chop off Brandes' dick, and they unsuccessfully tried to eat it. Meiwes taped the entire amputation, killing, conserving, and eating Brandes' meat. Meiwes was eventually arrested after his neighbor confronted him with evidence, and he was later tried and sentenced to life in prison. If you want to, you should look up the crime yourself. It's fascinating. From what I gathered, these guys, Bernd Brandes and Armin Meiwes, were just completely normal people, but with really weird kinks that they just couldn't control. 60-year-old Roger Wallace was flying his 5-foot wingspan remote control plane in Arizona when he lost sight of it in the bright sun. It then struck him in the chest, which killed him. A nameless 45-year-old Taiwanese woman bathed in 40.5% ethanol in an attempt to protect herself from SARS during the 2003 SARS outbreak in China. She lay down in the fluid at 11 p.m. and was found dead 12 hours later by her family the next day. Her blood alcohol content was 1.35%, which is a lot, ridiculously a lot, and she most likely absorbed the alcohol through her skin. 23-year-old Francis Brome was hanging out the passenger window of 21-year-old John Hutcherson's car. When Hutcherson drove off the road, sideswiped a telephone pole support wire, which decapitated Brome. Hutcherson continued the final 12 miles to his Atlanta home, parked in the driveway, and went to bed. This motherfucker didn't realize that the guy in his passenger seat got his head chopped off. A neighbor found Brome's headless body in the truck in the next morning. 28-year-old mother Jennifer Strange was participating in a contest sponsored by a Sacramento-based radio station called Hold Your Wee for a Wee, in which contestants had to drink excessive amounts of water without going to the bathroom, in which case they would be rewarded with a wee. She vomited during the contest and returned home with a headache, and she later died of water intoxication. Yes, you can die from too much water. I'll never understand these video game nerds. I mean, come on. Mike Edwards, the founding member of the band Electric Light Orchestra, was peacefully driving down the freeway in England when a large round bale of hay rolled down a hill and collided with the van he was driving. 2 unnamed people were killed in an accident on a rural Quebec road when a flying bear collided with their SUV. The 200-kilogram or 440-pound black bear was sent airborne by a car in front of the SUV after it had stepped into the path of traffic on Highway 148. The bear passed through the windshield, hitting the driver and the passenger sitting behind her, killing them both before passing through the rear window. The driver's boyfriend was in the front passenger seat and received injuries to his upper body, which were described as not life-threatening. The bear also died. 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was discovered trapped upside down in a rolled-up gym mat in his high school gymnasium. Police concluded he had climbed into it to retrieve a shoe that fell into it and became trapped, and he could not get out because the mat he got stuck in was surrounded by other mats and he couldn't move out of the way. Even if he screamed as loud as he could, nobody could have heard him because the mats drowned out all the sound. He was trapped upside down until he suffocated. I don't even really blame him. That seems like something I would do. And also, those gym mats can be a bitch to move, so like, can you blame him? 68-year-old James Campbell from Florida had left his 1995 Chevrolet van to open a gate from his driveway when his dog stepped on the van's gas pedal and ran him over. I love dogs. A nameless 60-year-old fisherman bled to death in Brest region, Belarus, after being bitten by a Eurasian beaver, which he had tried to grab to have his picture taken with it. Those Eastern Europeans really love beavers. Well, we've reached 2013, and I don't really see any deaths from the past 12 years that are worth it. Nothing from the past decade is real anyway. We all died in 2016, went to hell. This is hell. So yeah, thanks for watching, I guess. I worked hard to get this video done so I can get my next planned video out around February. You know what, I'll throw in one more just for old time's sake. So this is the most recent death on the list, only happening 20 days before this recording. A pilot and a navigator, who were both Russians, died of injuries sustained upon a collision with a hangar ceiling after the aircraft ejection system unexpectedly activated on a parked bomber. Both men were thrown upward at a sufficient vertical speed to cause what the source says were injuries incompatible with life. Bars! Fire way to put it. Why do we have to wait till 2025 to get this banger sentence? I thought poetry was dead or something. Well, I guess that's it. I'm tired of making this video. I'm gonna go to bed. The next one will be a banger, I promise. I promise, okay? I love you so much. Bye.